Hi everyone. A little bit sick today, so I wasn't thinking originally to make a video, but sitting around the house. So I thought I'd go into one question that has come up a lot, and I've tried to stay away from it, and that is how I got into Buddhism and ultimately became a monk. But I think, yeah, it's probably worth explaining or getting over, because there's a lot of people wondering who I am, whether they can trust the things I say and so on, wondering where I'm coming from, what my background is. So how I got interested in Buddhism, I think actually relates to when I was young. I was one of those people who, I think, among many people who had a keen interest in these big questions like why do we all have to die, and what is the meaning of life, and trying to find a way of living that has more meaning than just living for the sake of living or just to get by. I remember thinking about my family and just realizing one day when I was about 8 that everyone in my family is going to die, that all the people I knew are going to die, that this is a fact of life. And it hit me really quite profoundly, and it was something that posed questions in my mind. Why, or what do we do about this? There's nothing we can do. It was a sense of hopelessness. And I started getting this idea that my understanding of life was that we go to school to get a job, to get to collect money, to get old, or to retire, and by the time we retire, we're old, and we've lived most of our life out and haven't gained anything from it. So even when I was young, when I was, I think, maybe 11 or 12, I was really set in this idea that the ordinary way of living was meaningless, and I had to do something to find a way out. And so I started looking into things like meditation when I was practicing martial arts, and I remember incorporating meditation into it. When I started doing a little bit of teaching martial arts, I would teach people meditation as well, and people really liked it, and I thought it was great. And I would practice meditation at home. Even lying down in bed, I would enter into these states of intense concentration, and it was something that was always with me, even from that time. And then someone handed me in school the Tao Te Ching, which was a very important book for me for most of my teenage years. It was sort of what set me on this path. I instantly, reading this book, I was instantly converted and thought, I'm a Taoist. And from then on, when people asked, I said I was a Taoist, and this is what I believed in, and this is what resonated with me, was this teaching in the Tao Te Ching. So I tried to get through high school and did really well, but hated it, and asked repeatedly to leave school, to be taken out of school. Through public school I had been homeschooled, and it was only in high school that we went back, and it was just wasn't doing it for me. I said, this isn't the way to live our lives, this isn't for any purpose except getting into this wheel of samsara. And so my parents moved me to an alternative school, and then another alternative school, and finally I finished high school and went on to university. And then in university I decided that I'd had enough, and I dropped out of my first year of university. And there was a lot of stuff going on here. I wasn't at all spiritual. I was getting caught up in the teenage years, and hedonism, drugs, sex, rock and roll, all of these things that are supposed to bring happiness, and they were making me miserable. And I remember this was a terrible period of my life, and it just built up and built up to the point where in university I said that's it, and I withdrew and tried to find a place to go. Find a way to some sort of spiritual path to follow. I was thinking of going to Central America to do all the these crazy hallucinogenic drugs and with the shamans and so on. I was still sort of in that mode and a little bit lost. Didn't know where to go. But people kept pushing me to go to Thailand. There was, this person would talk about Thailand, that person would talk about Thailand, until finally one of my rock climbing friends suggested that we go there to do some rock climbing. So I took him up on that, thinking, this will give me a chance to practice, to follow Taoism, to follow these Taoist teachings. From Thailand, I'll make a trip to China or Japan, maybe get into some Zen or something. Try to find some place. And I was joking with people that I would, my intention was to become a monk, but, I never really took it seriously. I was looking for something, and I thought, I'll find the truth. I'll find some spiritual path. When I got to Thailand, it wasn't really what I had hoped for, and I wasn't really even looking in Thailand. I wasn't interested in Buddhism actually at all, except maybe Zen Buddhism. I was more interested in Taoism, and I was thinking about going to China. So I spent some time looking around and reading up on what's going on in China and where I could find some kind of Taoist teachings. And I didn't have much luck, but I bought a ticket to go to China, got my visa already, and I was ready to go. And then finally it just kind of hit me that, China's probably not going to be the most spiritual place. It's a communist country. At the time it wasn't yet even openly Buddhist. It was a pretty scary thing to just go into China not knowing anyone. So I changed my mind and went to meditate in Thailand, which turned out to be, I think, the right choice. It helped me to understand what is Buddhism, because when you read about Buddhism, often it's people talking about suffering, and it seems quite dry and dull and boring, especially sometimes the way it's presented. But when I went to meditate and started actually practicing instead of just reading and theorizing and thinking about it, it really helped me to understand what was this thing I was looking for. This talking about wisdom, and it kind of seemed in the beginning that wisdom would be something that you talk about and you just get it. But now, once I started meditating, wisdom became something that you understand, you realize for yourself through experience, through seeing for yourself. So I spent a month there meditating, and that changed my life. I would say that's probably the most important thing I've ever done. And then I went back. I was, it was kind of 50-50. Should I stay? Should I go? And someone suggested I should go back and get my education if my parents wanted me to. So I followed that advice and went back and spent the next 2 years. This is where you get into where my becoming a monk. So I'm just talking about my background, but I want you to understand that it's a little bit convoluted. You may not become a monk in exactly this way, because it took me 2 years to get my parents, almost consent. In Buddhism, we have this rule that if you're going to become a monk, your parents have to agree on it. And it's a useful rule, because it's very difficult to meditate if you have problems with the people that are close to you. So I spent 2 years trying to get to the point where I'd be able to ordain. I think in the beginning it wasn't really the major goal, but as I studied and as I meditated more and learned more about what the Buddha taught, it just seemed like the right way to go. It seemed like the answer, the next step. So I spent time learning about how to become, what was the life of a monk and what are the roles of the monk. And I spent most of those 2 years actually in a Buddhist monastery in Canada. I was quite fortunate to be able to stay at a Buddhist monastery while I was going to school. So instead of renting an apartment, getting a job, whatever, I had no money, I went to a Cambodian Buddhist monastery, this little church that they had bought, and started a Buddhist monastery, and asked them if I could stay there. And they were, kind of like, the abbot said to me, it's okay. And I learned after staying with him from from him that it's okay really means, no, we'd rather that you don't, but it was his way of politely saying, probably not a good idea. But I was stubborn and he let me, and we ended up getting along really well, and he's now one of my very good friends, even though we've kind of lost touch. But I stayed with him there, went to school, and kept the eight Buddhist precepts. I wouldn't eat in the evening, so I was at university all day, and I would only eat in the morning. I didn't have a job, so I would, just get by. There was a few days where I, didn't have any food to eat. It was really a hard life, but I felt like it was a training for me. So I think in that sense, it's important to point out that sometimes it helps to prepare yourself. This is why they often suggest people to go and stay at a monastery for a year or so. I kind of did this before I went to ordain. I was not really in a real monastic situation, but I was kind of living the life, keeping some of the monks' rules. In fact, I tried to keep as many of the monks' rules as I could, even not as a monk. But finally it became too much, and I decided that school wasn't going to work for me. And so I went back to Thailand, ordained as a monk. And the only way I could manage to ordain as a monk is if I promised my parents that I would come back and continue to learn. I said, don't worry, I'll become a monk, but I'll still come back and study. So I did. I became a monk, and then in the middle of the winter I went back to Canada and went back to school as a monk. And unsurprisingly, that didn't last long. I wasn't into it. I had kind of had enough of school. Well, I'd had enough of school many years ago, actually, but it was sort of an agreement that I'd had with my father that I'd go back to school. And so in the end, I broke the agreement. I said, I can't do it. It's not going to work. I have to follow my way. And so I left, did about a half a year of school, hung out for a while, did some stuff at the monastery, helped these novices, and then went back to Thailand. That's my story on how I became a monk. The actual ordination procedure, there's not much to say. I think what's important here is the path that leads up to it, getting your life in order. If you're this kind of person who believes in these sorts of things, that this is the way out. This is the path that has real meaning and benefit and purpose. Then do some meditation. Start on the course. Don't just say, okay, I'm going to go ordain as a monk. I would say these people don't tend to make it very far. If that's how you're starting out your spiritual life, you're probably just going to give up and get frustrated and go home, because you're not really ready for it. It's a big step. For me, it was 2 years of meditation, study, and just generally living the monastic life. And so if you can do that first, I think you'll be greatly benefited. When the day came to be ordained, there were 18 of us who ordained, and I'm the only one left. Most of them disrobed within a week. That's standard. But even the ones who had decided to stay on never made it. There were 2 other Westerners and 15 Thai people, and they've all disrobed. And I felt ready for it. For me, it wasn't a big deal. It was, it felt great. It was like a final release. And yes, I've made it. But as for a change in lifestyle, it didn't change much. And there were a bunch more rules that I had to keep, but other than that, I had already really prepared myself for it. That's my story. That's the first half of my story. The second half gets even crazier after I became a monk, but nobody's asked that question yet, so that's an answer to your question, how did I become a monk? I hope that covers the doubts that were in your mind, or the answers your question as you would have it answered. Okay, thanks, and talk to you soon.